Today we're going to make our terminal look like the Matrix. Hey, welcome back everybody. Several of you have asked over the last year if I would do a tutorial on how I made the drippy screen effect in my terminal that I used in my Halloween 2019 video. So I thought that would be a good topic for this week. This video deals with curses, which I've talked about in previous videos, links to those in the description. It's basically just a library that allows you to do GUI-like things in the terminal. Of course, there's going to be source code in this video, and all source code, as usual, is available through Patreon. A link down in the description, and a huge thanks to all of you who help support this channel and make this channel possible. Now, initially, I just planned on going through the code that I wrote back in 2019 until I looked at it again and then thought, this is a hacky mess that really was just for a special effect in a video and isn't really fit for human consumption. So I thought, let's just rebuild it from scratch today. And hopefully we'll come up with a cleaner version. So let's jump into the code. Here I've set up a couple of files just to get us started. This is going to be a little more organic, but I did want to do a little bit of planning before I got started. So main.c is going to have my main program. I've got ui.h and ui.c, which are going to have just basically some of my basic user interface functions. This follows the same model I used in the Halloween video. And then matrix.h and matrix.c are going to handle the model, the actual dripping of the text. And then I have a make file. I just basically borrowed that over from the Halloween video because it pretty much as is will work. If you have questions about make, if you haven't seen make and want a refresher, please check out my make videos. I'll link to those in the description as well, and they'll help you get caught up. But so if we jump over into main, the basic model that I'm going to use for this, we're going to, first of all, we're going to set up our user interface. So the basic flow is going to be something like this. This is probably going to give me a bunch of errors initially because I haven't written some of these yet. But we're just going to initialize our UI. If that doesn't work, then we're going to exit. And I'll just return exit failure. Okay, so that'll work for there. So just basically we're going to set up our program. We're going to have some kind of, let's call it matrix init. We're going to have something that sets up the model, the basic data model that we have. And then we're going to have a for loop here. And the for loop is going to go through a certain number of iterations of drippiness because I don't want this to run forever. We could just do an infinite while loop and make this run forever, but I'm not going to. And then we'll have another function here, which I also haven't written yet. And it's just going to update the matrix. So it's going to update the drippiness, the movement, and then we're going to have a show. Often in user interfaces, this might be called paint or something, but it's just going to show us the matrix. It'll show us the current state of what our drippy text on the screen looks like. And then because if we just run it straight up, it's going to go too fast and we're not going to see it. So we're going to add some kind of delay. I don't know what this is yet. We'll just call it refresh delay. We'll define that up here. So just, I guess, while we're thinking about it, let's define a couple of these things. I may change these later, but like let's say we do 300 iterations. That'll work well for testing. Let's define our refresh delay to something like, well, let's try 50,000, see what that does. Okay, so then if we come down here, then once this is all done, so this is going to go through and it'll do our little animation. And then once we're done, we're going to have something that's going to like clean up our user interface. And again, this is a function I haven't written yet. And then once we're done, we'll just say we succeeded, okay? So this is the basic flow that this program is going to take. We're going to initialize things at the beginning, clean things up at the end, and then in the middle, we're going to have basically going to update these data structures. And I'm loosely following what's called model view controller, which is I'm trying to have a view, which is the code that actually displays something, and then have the model, which is the data model behind the visualization that you're seeing. So it's the thing that represents the change. So in this case, it's that represents the dripping of the symbols down the screen, but then UI.c is going to actually do the displaying. Okay, so from here, we could go a bunch of different directions. Let's just start with our UI. Okay, I could do either, but yeah, I'm just going to start with the UI. And so let's jump over here. And basically, I'm going to define the dimensions of the screen. So you notice here, I've got my if-def guards. I have a video on these if you're curious about why they're here. They're just here to avoid any kind of double includes. And I have a video on that I'll put in the description if you want to check it out. But at this point, I'm just going to define a couple of things. Let's define our dimensions. Let's make our little screen. What we're going to do, we're going to have this grid of text, and that's going to be our drippy text. So typically you have to think about things in terms of a window or a screen in Curses. So I'm just going to define the X dimension to be 160. So that's 160 characters wide. And let's do the same thing with our Y, but let's make it 50 characters tall. Of course, you can adjust this to whatever your screen resolution and your character size in your terminal that you want. I'm also going to do this effect by having different intensities, or like how bright the little drippy text stuff is. And so I'm going to define a couple more constants here. And I'm going to later on map these to Curses colors. We're going to make a max and a min intensity. So maximum is going to be 13, minimum is going to be 2. So that works. Also, we're going to have this idea of having a cell. So what I'm going to do here is just have a struct that I'm going to call cell. And so each cell in our grid, we're going to have this grid, this matrix, we could call it. It's going to have a character value, and that's going to be the actual character on the screen, because I'm going to have these, like, I want it to look like different symbols, although we're just going to stick to ASCII printable characters for now. You could switch to Unicode and get fancier if you wanted later on. And I'm going to have an intensity. So what this is going to represent is that this cell on the screen, they're all going to be greens, right? Because that's the matrix. So everything's going to be green, but the intensity of this character in the grid is going to be specified by this member of our struct. Okay, and I'm going to call this cell. Yeah, so let's actually just go up here and just remove this. So we're just going to call this a cell. We got our cells. And then down here, you're going to have, let's just say somewhere else, it's actually going to be in matrix.c. But I just want to mention that we're going to have some kind of cell, a two-dimensional matrix of size max x and max y of cells. So this is going to be our cells, right? So, and it's going to be extern because it is declared elsewhere, or I should say defined elsewhere. So that's going to be probably, for now, I'll just put this in matrix.c. Okay, we're going to have this array somewhere else. We're going to use it, but we haven't defined it here. And then let's make some prototypes. So the functions we're going to need, I've already specified a bunch of these back in main. So we're going to have our initialization of our UI. So we're going to init our UI. We're going to clean up the UI when I'm done. And this is just there to try to keep all that cleanup and initialization code all in one place. I could have put it in main, but you know, I'm trying to teach you how to program. So let's try to create more modular code here. And then we're going to have our show matrix. This is going to be our update function that's going to actually show the current state of our model on the screen. Okay, so this is our UI.h. That looks pretty good. Now let's go back and actually implement some of this stuff. So far I just have headers here. There's a few other variables we're going to need. And you typically want to keep the variables local that aren't needed outside of this particular module. So in this case, one of those is this window. We're going to call it UI window. And we'll start it as a null. Basically, this is just a pointer to the struct that Curses uses to represent a window-like region on the screen. Okay, and then I'm also going to make an array of integers. I'm going to call this my color map. And the idea here is, what I want to do is over time, each of these symbols are going to fade. They're going to dim out as they sort of decay as the drip comes down. You notice in the effect, the front of the drip is really bright, but then it kind of trails off and it fades into nothing as it scrolls down. So what I want to do is to have this color map where I can just basically age a particular cell on the screen. I can basically make it get older, and this is what's going to happen with its intensity. Okay, so what we're going to do, let's just start out and define these as we'll start with color. So this is like the oldest, your lowest intensity. What you're going to end up with is like 2. So we're just going to fade down a little bit. So color 3, color 4. I'm going to set these colors up later. And then there's one thing that's a little weird that I'm going to do. I ended up doing this in the Halloween video. It made things look a little bit better, is I had the maximum intensity, so the brightest things can get at the very beginning, but then I just dimmed things a little bit immediately after. So it's like you get really bright and then things get a little dimmer at the, right after it, and then things brighten up again and then they fade more uniformly. And that just gave kind of a little flicker on the bottom, which I liked. You don't, of course, need to have this if you don't want it. And then let's come down here and set up our Init Ui function. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to set the matrix all to black. Okay, so the idea here is let's Let's go through our X and Y's. You're going to see this a few places in here. Basically, we're just going to go through all, every X value and every Y value. So we're going through this by columns. And we'll do the same thing for int Y equals 0 to max Y. Okay, and what I'm going to do here is just set the cell in my matrix. We're going to set the character value to be 0 initially, and we'll do the same thing, but the intensity we're also going to set to 0. Now this code conceptually, I started thinking about this as setting all the matrix. This actually belongs in the matrix code, so I'm actually going to move this later. But for now, I just want to leave it in because I guess it helps me think about what's going on. Now we're going to come in here and we're going to initialize curses. Okay, so here we're going to take that UI window variable that we declared up above and we're going to call init scr. Okay, this is typically like the first thing that you ever do when you're initializing a curses application. And we'll just check really quick to see if there were any problems. So if there were, we'll return false. So that tells us, hey, we couldn't actually set up curses. And there's a bunch of reasons that this might fail. Maybe you don't have curses installed in your machine, or your terminal doesn't support curses, or I don't know, something like that. And then after that, we're going to, because I'm going to use colors in here, we're going to call the start color function. That's just going to basically try to get curses to use colors. And then we're going to check to see, and so these are just a bunch of functions that curses gives us. So we can test our terminal and say if it has colors or if it can change color. So if it can't do either of these things, then what I'm going to do is just print out an error down here and just say, warning, sorry, your can't handle this program. Yeah, okay. And then we're going to return false here too, meaning we have a color issue. Also, let's just add one more thing in here that could be a problem, and that is, so curses defines a number of color pairs. And they're pairs because they're like foreground and background colors. But if we have fewer than 6, that's what we're using right now. And maybe we'll come back and pound define that 6 because that should really not be a magic number floating around in my code. But we'll leave it for right now because we're short on time. And I'm going to come down here and call a function. Let's call it set colors. This is a function that I'm going to write, okay, and that's going to set up my custom colors because by default, the colors in curses are not a bunch of shades of green, but that's actually what I want them to be. So this function is here right now. Of course, it's not going to work because we haven't done anything, but we can return true. Okay. So at this point, this is our setup. We can set up our UI this way. And then down below, let's make our cleanup, just while we're thinking about it, our cleanup UI function. And this one's much simpler. All it's going to do is delete the window. And we're going to end when. Okay, so these are just two cleanup functions that Curses has, which basically undoes a bunch of the stuff they set up, tries to return your terminal to a normal state. And then we're also going to call its refresh function, which is just, again, a function that Curses uses to refresh the screen. So now let's come down and look at how we're going to show our matrix. So that was our last piece. And basically here, we're going to do the same thing we did up here. It's the same type of loop, the go through each cell in the matrix kind of loop. And then, but what we're going to do here is we're going to set the color. So we're going to change the color based on the intensity. So first I'm going to grab the intensity. Okay, and I'm doing this, I could do this all in one line, but I'm doing this just to make it a little easier to read in case any of you are having trouble following. But I'm going to grab the intensity from that location, the location we're trying to print out, and then I'm going to set the color according to the color map. So that's my whole color map. You remember up above I'm basically just going to pass in the intensity that I want here. And so we're just going to set that. We're going to call color set. If you more information about what color set does, just check the man page. But what that's going to do is it's basically going to set up the color that I want to apply to that intensity. And I'm going to set that up eventually when I write set colors. And then once we set the color, then we're going to use this move add character function. And we're going to give it the Y value and the X value. It's a little weird that they go Y first, but that's just the way that Curses does it. And then we're going to, again, just look in our matrix and grab the character value for that spot. So what this is doing is it's moving to a particular row and column and then adding the character that I specified to that position. And then the only other thing that I need to do down here is call refresh again. Okay, because we've updated the screen, but we want it to sort of refresh all at once. And this keeps you from having this kind of like piecewise update. So it updates all at once. Okay, so now last thing I'm going to do is let's go ahead and make this set colors function. We'll come back to this. For now, I'm just going to leave this as is. We'll just use the default colors. It won't look right initially, but we can come back to it. Okay, so now let's jump over and look at our matrix. So if we jump over to matrix.h, you can see that I have my if-def guards here, and really we're just going to have two functions in this header file, right? There's two publicly facing functions here, and they're going to be matrix init. So that's going to set up everything. And then we're going to have matrix update. Okay, and matrix update is going to be called each time just to update the matrix to actually do the little drippy thing. And that's it for our header file. Let's jump over to see our .c file. Now here we got a few different things that we're going to do. The first thing that I want to do, the model, is we're going to have these things. I'm going to call them drips, I guess. But the idea is they're going to be things that are moving down vertically down the screen. But before I get too far ahead of myself, let's just create a few functions. Let's create our matrix init function, and it's eventually going to init the drips. But before we do that, let's actually move some of the stuff over. In my UI, I had this initialize matrix thing here. So I'm going to actually remove that. And let's move it over here. So here we're going to put this in place. And here we're going to also define our matrix itself. So our matrix is a cell. Notice that we imported ui.h. I probably actually should move that over to matrix.h. Anyway, we'll make that decision a little bit later. But we know we've got our matrix, which is going to be of size max x by max y. So we're going to define that. Matrix init is going to initialize those values. So that's going to basically get it all set up and start as 0. So 0 is going to be 0 intensity, so all black, and character value, just the null character. So there's nothing actually there. And then down here, we're going to call this init drips function. That's going to basically start out these drips. Just to define our drips a little bit, let's make another struct. And this is going to have, we're going to have an XY value for our drip. That's basically where the front of the drip is going to be. And let's basically see like whether it's alive. So like not all of our drips are going to be alive necessarily. So let's just put that into place. Looks like it doesn't like that. Let's include standard bool.h. Okay, that should help out there. And a semicolon. We're going to call this a drip. Okay, so that basically is going to be our drip. It's going to have some X, Y, and it's going to be alive or not. So alive basically means it's actively dripping down the screen. And we're going to add these because we want it to look kind of random and organic. So our drips are going to have an X, Y coordinate. They're going to have a point, and that's going to be the front that's dripping down. And we also want to record whether they're alive or not, which basically tells us whether it's actively dripping. I want to make this look kind of organic, so I want them to appear or disappear. I don't want to just have them like always moving around. We're not making snake here, we're making a matrix. So then down here, let's also make a function that's going to init our drips. And this will just have a for loop. Okay, so we'll just go through our number of drips. Before I do this, I'm getting ahead of myself. Let's make an array of drips. And we'll say a certain number of drips. Let's come up here and define that. And let's say we have up to 250 drips. You can adjust this, of course, if you want more or fewer, but I'm going to start with 250. That seems like a good number. And so, yeah, let's just go through our drips. And then we're going to basically initialize each of our drips and make its live value false. So they start out all gone. So initially we have no drips. We're just going to have a blank screen. Okay, now let's go down here and also create our last public function, which is going to be matrix update. Okay, so the basic idea here is, and let's define a few things. So the first thing here is we need to like throw the dice. We want to produce some kind of randomness here. And so yeah, here I'm going to get back to this, but we're going to basically, if we roll the dice, I'm going to come back and fill that in with some code in a minute, but then we're going to have something that we're going to try to add drips, right? So I'm going to try to add drips, but I want to do it probabilistically and randomly so that they kind of appear in a somewhat organic fashion. And then each time we update, so basically each update, you're gonna see if we can add more drips, and then we're going to update our drips. Again, a function that I haven't written yet, but this is basically going to do the dripping motion. And then the other thing that I'm gonna do, and this is gonna cause the fading effect, is I'm basically gonna go through the whole matrix and fade everything. Okay, so basically the things that get updated stay bright, the things that get faded eventually disappear. So if you're not getting updated, eventually you're gonna disappear. And so we'll make another function we'll call it fade and change matrix. Okay, so let's see if we can implement a few of these. Let's start with this fade and change matrix. I actually like that. We're gonna come in here. So this is going to be really key to our effect here. Let me just, once again, we're gonna go through the whole matrix. So we'll just borrow that double for loop. Oh, except I just realized I used I. Man, old habits. You get so used to typing I in every for loop that when it's something else, yes, I get it wrong all the time. So, okay, so we got our X's and Y's straight, I believe. Now, what we're gonna do here is, we're basically gonna do two things. First of all, I want to randomly change characters. Now this, I'm even going to change the invisible ones. Okay, so I need some kind of probability here that's gonna handle that. Okay, and then I'm going to, down here, randomly dim the cells. Okay, so the first thing I'm gonna need, now that I'm doing probability, I'm gonna need some kind of randomization. I'm gonna need the ability to throw the dice. So let's just, I can see I'm gonna need this. Let's jump up and make another function that's going to come in handy. So rand, we could just use rand straight up, but I think it's going to be a little easier to make a version of rand. We'll call it rand01, which is basically going to give us a number, a double, that is between 0 and 1. Okay, so this is just going to return, let's cast rand's value to a double, and then we'll divide it by rand max. Okay, so this should take the range of rand and give me a value from 0 to 1. So that's really handy here for my probabilities. So now I can do things like, I can say, if rand01 is less than the probability of change. Okay, so what I'm doing here is I'm basically just saying I have some probability with which things are going to change, and if they change, and let's actually add one more thing here. Or if the matrix value at x, y, if its character value equals 0. If its character value is 0, I always want to change it because, you know, we need something printable here. But so if we hit the probability of change, so with some probability, what we're going to do is we're going to come down here and we're actually going to update this. And let's just, what we want here is a random printable character. Okay, and I'll figure this out later. Currently, random printable character doesn't exist. That's okay. Then down here, what we're gonna do is do something very similar. We're gonna do rand01 again, but this time it's the probability of dimming. Okay, so all I'm doing here, I'm just allowing us to have different probabilities that we can use. Actually, let's keep around intensity. I'm gonna need that here shortly. And then basically what I'm going to do here is just say, look, if my intensity of this particular cell is greater than 0, then I'm going to dim it. Okay, so we're just going to bring the intensity down with some random probability. Okay, so this basically is just going to give me my fading effect that I want. That's great. Now let's look at how we actually make the drips work. So down here we had our dice roll to create the drips. So let's try to actually make this real. So what I'm gonna do is say, same thing I've been doing everywhere else is just have rand01 and then less than some probability. So let's call this prob drip spawn. Okay, so basically like what's the probability that a new drip comes into being? And let's jump up here and let's actually define this. I think we're gonna have a bunch of these probabilities before we're done. Let's make this one 65%. And then while we're at it, let's actually add some other probabilities here. Like the probability of dimming, I'm going to start out as 55%. I think that's actually what I used in the previous one. Either way, I think it'll work. We can play with it once we get things further along. And let's define our probability of change. So that's going to be whether or not a character changes in our grid. I want that to be pretty close to 1. Let's do that maybe at like, 95% for now. Again, we can change these all later on if we decide that this is not what we want. Okay, so now if we look back down here, so we have this, basically, we need this try add drips function. This is something I haven't written yet, but let's just add it in. Let's create a function try add drips. And what we're going to do here is for loops. So many for loops in this code. That's okay. We're going to go through all of our drips. And then what we're going to do here is basically check to see if this particular drip, the drip we're looking at, if it is alive. So if it's currently active, if it's dripping, then we don't want to do anything. But if it's not, if it's false, so if it's not alive, basically it's not there, then we're going to basically try to create a new one. Okay, so what this is going to look like is now we're going to say, let me just grab this. So we're going to set it equal to true. So now this is a live drip. We're going to set its x value to be some random x value. So we'll just rand mod max x, that should be great. And hold on, let me change these to drips, forgot an S, sorry. So then down here, we're going to have our y value. So drips I.y is going to be equal to 0. So this means that they're always going to start dripping from the top. Now in the video, if you watch that Halloween video, you notice that some of them appeared in the middle. If you wanted them to appear in the middle, you would just basically have this mimic what you have up here. So you could have something like this, but it would be rand mod max y, and that would basically pick some random y value in the range between 0 and max y minus 1. But for now, I'm just going to always start at the top. That's just the way I want this to be. And I just realized though that I need something else here. One thing that I wanted, one thing that I did before, I'm just remembering now, is that I had this ability so that they didn't all appear quite the same. Some appeared very faint and some appeared a little stronger. And that's why before, you remember I had min intensity and max intensity. So let's add one other thing to our drips, and we'll call it let's call it bright. So we're going to have bright ones and dark ones. And this, I'm just going to do rand mod 2. So this is going to be a number that's either 0 or 1. And I'm going to use that later on. I'll show you in a minute. But so we'll come in here and we'll add this. So we're going to add that bright value. That's going to determine whether it's bright or it's dark. Okay, so now if we come down here, we can try add drips. Now this is basically what we need, right? We need this. And in the video, what I did is I actually added a return statement here. It depends on the behavior you want, but basically what I'm trying to do is I'm not going to add more than one per time. So I'm basically going to add a new drip if the probability was less than prob drip spawn. Basically that's going to add one new drip because I want these to kind of appear one at a time. If I wanted it to be more, I wouldn't return here and I would actually like have a counter or something, and then that would work as well. But this is going to work fine for right here. So I'm just basically going to return once I find a drip and I create it. Otherwise, I would go through and create all the drips, which would feel very sudden, I think. So feel free to play with this to get your own effect. You could definitely customize this. Okay, now let's go down and I want to look at this update drips. Okay, so we need to create a new function here, update drips. And what this is going to do is each time through, we're going to again go through our drips. So many for loops. But what we're going to do is if a particular drip is alive, then we're going to go in and we're going to actually do something with it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the drip point, the location of the front of the drip, and we're going to do something. We're going to vary this depending on whether it's bright or not. Okay, so if this is a bright drip, then what we're going to do is we're going to update our matrix at that location. So drips i.x and i.y. Okay, so this is, hold on, got to get my syntax right. Okay, so this is going to be the matrix location at the location of this drip. And what I'm going to do is set the intensity to be max intensity. And then else, if that's not the case, then I'm going to do the same thing but we're going to set it equal to min intensity. Okay, so you remember before, back in UI, I defined this min intensity to be 2, and we could set it something like 4 if we want. It doesn't really matter, but basically that's just going to mean that some of my drips are going to be dim while others are going to be bright. So again, you can play with that to get the effect that you want. Now, one more thing, if it's live, we need to come down here and we need to make sure that our drips, we want our drips to die when they hit the bottom of the screen. So what this is going to look like is something like this. Okay, we want to always increase the Y value. Okay, so what I'm going to do is just do this. So this is going to increment the Y value. And then what I'm going to do is just check to see if we've left the screen. So if we've hit max Y minus 1, so we get to the bottom of the screen, then what we're going to do is set this drip to no longer be alive, and so that drip is going to die. So basically it's just going to run to the bottom. When it hits the bottom, it's going to disappear. But remember, the drip itself isn't going to just vanish all of a sudden because it leaves a trail, right? Basically, as this drip point moves, it's updating the intensity of that point, and then everything else is probabilistically fading, and so that's going to give us this kind of like fading away effect, this memory effect that we like. And that's really all we need for updating the drip. So this is going to work just fine here. So let's look through here. What else do we need? Random printable character. For right now, what I'm going to do for random printable character, we'll revisit this, but for right now, let's just define random printable character to be X. Yes, we will change this, but initially we'll just start with X. We can play around with it, and then we'll fix that later. Okay, so now let's see where we're at. Basically, let's just really quick, let's just see. Okay, we got some errors here. UI.h, we don't know what bool is. Okay, that's easy enough. We will just include standard bool.h. Okay, that should take care of that one. And then unknown name type drip. That's in matrix.c. And for that, I just need to move this up above. Easy enough. Okay, now we got a couple things. The main thing is we still haven't set our colors. We haven't set our colors. We're calling it from UI.c line 25. So let's take a look down here. I think the problem, we created our set colors, but we haven't really done anything with it. But still, I don't want to do anything with it just yet. So let's just make a prototype up here. That's the main problem, is just that it can't see the function. So let's see where we're at. Oh, looks like I forgot my eyes to be X's again. Sorry about that. Those that are following along are like, what were you thinking back then? Glad that you were paying attention. Okay, so we have this running. Let's see what happens here if we run it. So if we run it, you're going to see, okay, it goes all black, and then it doesn't seem like it's doing quite what we want. Now, one of the reasons why it's not doing quite what we want is that the terminal built into VS Code doesn't seem to be full featured. It doesn't seem to have all of the features that I would like. So we're going to open up a new terminal window, and that's going to hopefully work a little better. But let's just see what happens if we run this. Now you can see, first of all, we're not seeing anything. Now this is probably due to the fact that we have not set our colors. Okay, so it's working, but you can see we have X's everywhere. That's what I was looking for now. I'm obviously not doing randomization. So let's go in and let's actually set our colors. Now, setting colors in curses is just a little bit weird, and I'm not gonna go all like super in depth with it, but let's just go through and we're gonna set up a couple of colors. The first thing I wanna do is just make sure that all my colors have black backgrounds. So let's go through the bottom 8 colors. I think those are the only ones I'm using. I'm actually only using the bottom 6, but we'll just do this. And then this init pair function, this is a curses function that helps us initialize different colors. So there's a preset number of colors. So what I'm gonna do here, and if you want more details about how you set colors, just check the man page for init pair and you can see basically everything that's going on. So really all we're doing here is we're saying that the I+1th pair, we're trying to skip the 0th pair because that one's just like black. But so we're gonna set it, the foreground to be the ith color, okay? So just whatever the default color is for now. And then we're going to set the background of this to black because we want everything to be black, okay? So that's pretty straightforward. It might already be the case, but just in case, I'm being careful. And then we're going to set some different shades of green. So what I'm gonna do here is do something very similar. We're just gonna get another for loop in here. And because we're really only using color 0 to 6. I'm just going to go to 5 on this. And then we're going to say, okay, color I is going to have we're not going to init pair, we're going to init color. And so what we're going to do then is provide the RGB value for our updated color, right? We actually want to change the ith color, and we don't want any red. We do want some green. So we're going to do I times 200. So this will basically give us increasing intensities of green, or increasing brightnesses, and no blue. And then here at the end, I'm going to create the 6th color. I actually want to be a little bit different. I don't want it to just be a standard green. I want that maximum brightness to actually have a little bit of everything else in it. I want it to be almost white. So we're going to do 800, 1,000, and 800. Again, you can play with this however you want to make sure you get the effect that you're interested in. And this should be I, this should be 6. So that will be our final color value. And so, yeah, so we're just basically setting up the colors the way we want it. Now let's see how things work. Now if we switch back here, we can compile. Looks okay. And if we run it, now you can see, okay, we've got things coming down. Now, that last color, it's kind of a little bit purple, which actually isn't what I had in mind. So maybe let's go back and tone this down a little bit. Oh, I see what I did. I forgot to go all the way up to 5. Okay, so that's why we ended up with magenta. I was like, what's going on? Okay, so now we can jump back in here and we should get something a little more the way I expected it. Okay, so here we go. You've got kind of that bright spot on the bottom, and then things are fading as they're coming down. Okay, so this looks good. But we're all doing X's, so let's just update this really quick. Let's go back into our code. And really to make this work, the only thing that I need to do is to go back into here and change this. So instead of just giving us an X, let's do something like 33, which happens to be where the printable characters start. And then I'm gonna add rand, and we'll mod 80 just to make sure that, so basically we're gonna give you about 80 different character values. You can pick whatever characters you want here. And like I said before, you could like pick Unicode characters if you wanna make it seem so ASCII. Okay, so that looks good. Now let's switch back to our terminal. We'll compile and we'll rerun. And now you get this kind of matrixy code changing, characters changing all the time randomly as it comes down. And folks, that's how we do it. That's how we make our terminal look like the Matrix and drip characters down in random fashion using curses. I hope this is fun, maybe even helpful at some point if you want to play jokes on your coworkers, or you just want to customize your terminal in an interesting way. Either way, if you enjoyed it, like this video, subscribe if you don't want to miss the next one, and I'll see you next time.